What's up guys, this is Skit and today you are going to be building your very own first computer. You're going to need a power supply, some RAM, a motherboard, a graphics card, a case, a solid state drive, an aftermarket cooler, a hard drive, and last but not least, your unit. You will notice that your power supply has a fan at the bottom. This is supposed to take cold air from the bottom of the case to be blown into the power supply and out now as hot air. To position the power supply into the case, you want to put it into the case so that it's flush with the back and then push it into the corner. Then you want to screw it into place. In normal cases, you have brackets at the front side of the case. However, in this case, in the back side, you have these great creative mounting brackets for your hard drive and solid state drive. Unscrew the bracket. Take it out. You are going to take your hard drive. As you can see, it has 4 places where you are going to screw the hard drive to the bracket. You want to align those places with your bracket and screw it in. Now take the 3.5 inch screws which come with the case and screw it in tight. Now put the hard drive back in. And now screw the mounting bracket back in. Now unscrew the 2.5 inch mounting bracket. Now take your SSD and your bracket and again align the two together. Now screw the 2.5 inch bracket to the 2.5 inch drive using the screws the manufacturer has provided. Now take the SSD, which is now mounted into the bracket, and put it back into the case. Now let me mention something about electrostatic protection. Until now, there was very little or no risk that you would get an electrostatic discharge with the components that we handle with. Now we're going to components like the motherboard, where touching pins, if you are charged, will definitely cause a discharge. However, you can ground this by touching any metallic part of the case, which will effectively ground you, thus you will not discharge yourself into the components. Now let's take a look at the motherboard. This is your CPU slot. These are your headers which connect to USB, DVI, HDMI, and others. This is your PCI X16 slot where you are going to put your graphics card. These are your DDR4 RAM slots where you will insert your RAM. This is the 24-pin power connector, and this is the 8-pin power connector, which is going to go from the power supply to here. And here are the SATA 6 gig ports, which will connect your drives to the motherboard. Now it's time to install your RAM. To run in dual channel configuration, or the fastest possible speed, if you're using 2 sticks of RAM, then your motherboard specificates which slots you should use. In this case, it's this one and this one. Now, as you can see, the RAM is notched, so it will only install in one orientation. If I try to put it in like this, the notch would stop me and it wouldn't work. To install the RAM, pull back on the 2 hinges, make sure that the notch corresponds to the notch on the motherboard, and put the RAM in. Now it's time to install the CPU, or Central Processing Unit. Pull back on this handle and push it out. Open up the socket. Make sure that you do not touch any of the pins. Now take your CPU. Make sure that you don't touch the top, or else you will put hand grease on the CPU and it may decrease its cooling ability. Now, there are 2 notches on the CPU. Each corresponds to a notch on the socket. Now place the CPU in so that it is aligned with the 2 notches. If it fits in well, close down the hatch. If it does not, don't be afraid to take it out and put it back in so you don't bend any pins. You will notice that the cover jumps out. Now it's time for you to install your aftermarket CPU cooler. Since there are only 4 holes which will be used to mount your CPU cooler, you have to mount a backplate, something that will support your CPU cooler and enable it to be installed. Every backplate installation differs, but there is a general basic. Be sure these screws are in the right orientation. Now, flip your motherboard around. Install a black backplate into the 4 holes. Support it and flip the motherboard back up. Each aftermarket CPU cooler will in its manual tell you how to install it. This current CPU cooler uses these thumb caps. Now you want to make sure that the fan is blowing the air in the correct direction. As you can see, there's an arrow on the fan which points in the direction the air is flowing, which is in this case this way. We want the air going out from here and exhausting into the back. So this is in our case the correct orientation. Now it's time to apply the thermal paste. A lot of people tell you that you need credit cards and things like that to apply thermal paste. Luckily, your heatsink does that. So, you want to take your thermal paste and put a half a pea sized dot in the middle. Now, before installing your CPU cooler, be sure that any stickers like this are removed. Now, using only downwards force, place it right onto the mounting points. When you're sure it's well placed, you can start screwing it in. Now, take the 4-pin cable that is connected to the fan and connect it to the CPU fan motherboard header. As you can see, it's notched, so it can only install in one orientation. That's done. Now it's time to install our motherboard I/O shield, a step that many builders forget. Now, you want to make sure that it's in the correct orientation before pushing it in. When you are sure that it is in the correct position, push in. You should hear 4 clicks. Now, this case provides a key as to which mounting points you should be using, with ADX, the full form factor, MATX or micro ADX, which is the smaller form factor, and ITX, which is the mini form factor. Now, since we are using an ATX case, we will use the ADX mounting points. I previously said A's stand for ADX, and while you can't probably see them, there are A's in all of these mounting points. Now, since the case is metal, if we place the motherboard into it, since all the back pins of the motherboard would basically short, then your components and your motherboard would probably get destroyed. That's why we have to provide an air gap, which is in the form of a riser. Now, let's screw those risers in. Now that the risers are in, we will use a tool that the manufacturer has provided us with to tighten the risers. Now, take your motherboard, supported by both the cooler and the bottom of the motherboard, and put it in so that the I/O shield corresponds to the motherboard. Now it's time to connect your onboard interface to the motherboard. As you can see, each connector has a plus and a minus sign. This corresponds to the plus and the minus sign on the pins. If you can't read these, then you should go and check your motherboard manual, where it should be clearly stated which is which. Let's start with the hard drive LED. Then, the power switch. The reset switch. And the power LED with the plus and the minus. Now connect your case fans to the motherboard. Connect it to any connector that says Che and fan for Chase's fan. Now connect your other fan. This cable will connect the HD audio inside your case to the motherboard. As you can see, it has one filled pin, which corresponds to one black on the motherboard. It is put into the AAFP slot. There we go, that's your HD audio installed. Now this cable connects your USB 3.0 at the front of the case to the motherboard. As you can see, it's notched, so it can only install in one orientation. That's it. This is the 24-pin power connector, which is going to be connected into your power supply and into your motherboard. This is your 4+4 pin eATX connector, which is going to be delivering power from your power supply into your CPU. This is your SATA power cable. It will be delivering power from your power supply into your hard drives and SSDs. This is the 6+2 pin PCIe power connector. It will be delivering power from your power supply into your graphics card. This is your peripheral Molex power connector. It delivers power to such accessories as fan controllers. Now let's connect your 24-pin mother. Now let's connect your 24-pin motherboard power connector. First, by connecting it into the power supply and connect it to your motherboard. As you can see, there's a notch on one side of the connector which corresponds to the notch on the cable. Now connect your 4+4 pin connector to the motherboard, starting by connecting it to the power supply. Now connect it to the motherboard. As you can see, there's a notch on the bottom which corresponds to this notch on the cable. Now it's time to connect your SATA power cables to the hard drives. First, plug in the 6-pin into the peripheral and SATA. Now connect the SATA cables in as shown here and here. Now it's time that your data from your SSD and your hard drive to be put into your motherboard. For this, you are going to use the SATA 6 gig ports and 2 SATA cables like this one. Connect it into the port . And connect the data cables to the drives. Now is the perfect time to run the first test. Connect your PC into the power and connect your monitor into the power. Shut the monitor on, and as you do that, press the switch on the power supply and then the power switch. And as you'll notice, the fans will start spinning and the computer should boot up. As you can see, it's working perfectly. All 8 gigs of RAM are read, our CPU is read, and both our hard drive and our solid state drive are read. There are 2 chassis fans that are connected, so we did that well too, and the CPU fan is also connected. Now it's time to install your graphics card, one of the main components inside a computer. To install the graphics card, you are going to have to remove 2 of these parts. That is so that these connectors will fit outside the case here. You want to put your graphics card in the top working PCI X16 slot, which is usually the top one. If you aren't sure which 2 of these to remove, don't be afraid to take your graphics card and test it out for yourself. In my case, it's these 2. Now take them out. Take your graphics card and be sure to remove any plastic casing before installation. Open up this notch and put the graphics card in. Now, take the screws you took out earlier and screw them back in. Now it's time to power your graphics card. Take out the PCIe cable, which reads PCIe, and connect it into the power supply. Some graphic cards have 6-pin power connectors, which look something like this, and some have 8 pins, which look like this. Now, as you can see, the cable is a 6 plus 2 pin. If you're only using a 6-pin graphic card, just don't use the 2 pins and only connect the 6 pins. If you're using an 8-pin, then use both. As you can see, the connector on the graphic card is notched, so the cable, which is also notched, can only be installed in one orientation. So it's installed like this. Now is the time to finally test your PC. So, connect your power supply into power, shut it on, and press the power switch. And make sure the monitor is on too. However, this time, be sure to connect the monitor, not to the motherboard, but to the graphics card. As you can see, everything is ready. Thank you for building this PC with me. Have good luck with your own build, and make sure to hit the like button or subscribe if you like this video and you want to see more content.